Hello, my name is Gaia Golan. I am here with Herta Weinstein. We're in Berkeley, California, in the US. It is November 17th, 2023. We will be conducting the interview in English. Hello, my name is Gaia Golan. I'm here with Herta Weinstein. We're in Berkeley, California, USA. It is November 17th, 2023, and we will be conducting the interview in English. Could you tell me your name and spell it for me?
My first name is Herta, Herta. My last name is Weinstein, Weinstein.
When were you born?
When? March 20th, 1927,
And where?
in Vienna, Austria.
When you were born, what was your name then?
My first name was the same. Last name was Silser, S as in Sam, ILZ as in zebra, ER.
What is your current age?
96.
Did you have any nicknames as a child?
No.
Let's see. What is the name of your father?
His first name is Paul, Paul.
And his family name? His family name?
Silser.
And your mother?
My mother's first name was Leontine, Leontine. She was a little bit of a lioness.
Did she go by her full name?
Tinny. They spelled that Tinni.
And how is your father's name spelled, Paul?
Paul, Paul.
What is your mother's maiden name?
Pollack, Pollak.
Do you have any siblings?
No.
What did your father do for a living?
Well, he was kind of middle management in a textile business, and he was well known for the fact that he could memorize all the stock names of all the fabric bolts that they dealt with. And the secret reason that he did that is that he was colorblind. So he knew all the numbers of all the fabrics, but he wasn't sure of the colors.
Was your father originally from Austria as well?
Both my parents were born in Vienna.
And what did your mother do for a living?
She was the queen of the household. And she had a maid. I mean, we had a maid.
What was her name?
Irma.
How did you feel about Irma?
Oh, I've written a little piece about her. She was my ally against my mother. And we had extended conversations about my mother's foibles. And she treated her, and my mother treated her in a somewhat uppity way, pretty much the way she treated me. And so I felt we were on the same level.
What language would you speak at home?
German.
Did you know any other languages growing up?
No. I mean, later on, I took French lessons in school and Latin, but I didn't speak any other languages. I didn't have any English. My parents had a little English that they had learned in school.
What was your relationship with your father like?
Very nice, very nice. He was a very gentle man, and very accepting of me, except I could not talk to him about my complaints about my mother. He was very loyal. He would, that was just beyond consideration.
Do you know when your father was born?
1898.
And did he have any siblings?
Oh, yes, several. There were 4 or 5, there were 5 of them. And I have a picture of, I think I have a picture of them when they were young.
Were you close with any of his siblings?
Yes. He had one, so there were 4 brothers and 1 sister. And the sister was my aunt, and I was very close with her. And there's an interesting little piece of family history, which is that my aunt, my father's sister, was married to my uncle, who was my mother's oldest brother, the one in the uniform.
Can you tell me their names?
Yeah, they were married. He was Joseph. The family called him Yoshi. I should say all my 4 grandparents were born in Hungary. And my mother spoke Hungarian. And anyway, so the oldest sister and the oldest brother were married first. And then 2 years later, my parents were married.
So your uncle Joseph, who's your mom's older brother,
Right.
and your father's sister, what was her name? Nellie.
Yeah, that's his sister. And they're the ones I went to in Glasgow.
They lived in Glasgow.
They emigrated to Glasgow.
Can you tell me about your father's other siblings?
Well, now, a little bit. He had an oldest brother whom I did not know, who for some reason was kicked out of the family, and I never found out why. And that brother had 2 sons who were my first cousins, but I didn't know of their existence. I didn't find out about that until after Hitler, when they appealed to my father for money for a ticket to Canada, because they didn't have any money. And so he arranged that. That was when I found out that they existed, and only by eavesdropping, really.
Now, what was this uncle's, your father's oldest brother, what was his name?
Otto.
Otto. And the sons?
I'm not sure. I couldn't. I knew it once, but I, Freddie. So Frederick, and we even. So I never met those boys in Vienna. And many years later, I they connected with my mother by mail. They were in Canada, in Toronto. And many years later, on a trip, my husband and I went to Toronto. And I met Freddie, and I did not like him. But that was that was a one-day relationship.
So we had Otto as the oldest brother. Who is the next brother, younger than
Well, that
Otto?
was my aunt, Nellie.
Mhm.
And then some either before or after her was a man whose name was Alfred, and he emigrated to Great Britain, and I met them again in London. Um, then it was my aunt and then my father. Oh, and then there was a younger brother who was an atypical Viennese Jew. He was not a white collar worker. He did not have a university education. He taught tennis in the summer and ice skating in the winter. So he was a sturdy guy, and he survived the war in Vienna and Hungary.
What was his name?
Walter survived the war. He had a wife who was Christian, and her parents had sheltered him for a little while. But then I don't know the details. That became impossible. And he was deported to Hungary, and he was put in a work camp, but he survived the war, became a pillar of the Jewish community in Vienna. He was one of the old guys in Vienna. Found a new wife in the Hungarian countryside, Jewish. Had two daughters who were then my cousins. Yeah.
Do you remember their names?
Not really. It might come back to me, but I mean, I met them once or twice on trips to Vienna when I was a tourist. And my first trip to Europe after I finished school and medical school and all that was with a friend of mine, and we wanted to go to Italy and France. And my father said, but you can't go to Europe and not go to see Uncle Walter. I did not want to go to Vienna for anything, but I did for 3 days. I went to see Uncle Walter, and I met those two girl cousins whom I didn't know, who were young teenagers, 12 plus or minus one. Yeah. So he survived the war, grounded a second family, and who lived for quite a few years.
Now, going over to your mother, when was your mother born?
1895.
And did she have siblings?
Vienna. Well, yeah, well, yes. Everybody had siblings, except me. Uh, well, her oldest brother was my uncle. That was in World War One. Then she had an older sister whose name was Berta, who also ended up in Glasgow, where my uncle, in case it's a little parenthetical, the problem with Jews getting out of Germany, out of Hitler's Germany and Vienna, was where to go. Because the other countries did not want immigrants, sort of like we don't want immigrants. Only more so because they were Jews. Well, here they're Mexicans or Asians is also bad, but Jews is worse worldwide. Yeah. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought now.
Your mother's oldest brother, Joseph.
Well, he went to Great Britain. He was an engineer, and he brought a job. His job took him to Britain. He must have worked for a Jewish entrepreneur, a business. He was their engineer, and so if you brought capital into Great Britain, you could get in, and you could bring an employee or two or whatever. So that's how he and his wife and his sister, my mother's older sister, went to Glasgow, Scotland, because that was where the factory relocated. And that's where he was. That's where he was living when I got there.
So we have Joseph and we have Berta. Your mom had another brother.
My mother. Mm-hmm. Then she had a younger brother. Who had a child 5 years younger than I. So that was my girl cousin. And I was very fond of her. And they made it out just barely. I don't know exactly how, but they didn't have any place to go. But they went illegally over the border to France on the last day before the war broke out.
And this cousin's name?
Lisa Lotte in German, but became anglicized to Lisa.
And her father's name?
Erwin, Eiwin.
Did you grow up playing with Lisa?
Yeah, some. I mean, I was 5 years older, and so she was like a baby sister. And, I was fond of her, but she's like having a doll, She was very, very cute baby. And it was a pretty close family, so I saw her with some frequency.
Were you close with any of your grandparents?
Well, my grandfather, well, my mother's father, I really only remember dimly, but he died when I was, well, I don't know, somewhere between 5 and 10. And but I remember sitting on his lap and being, fondled. And he was a nice grandpa. He was the only one in the family who had a stomach like this. Everybody else was, my other grandfather was quite skinny. He was nice, yeah. Both grandmothers were dead.
What was the name of your mother's father?
Joseph. Joseph.
Joseph is your mother's older brother. Her father is Herman, right?
You're right. Sorry about that.
And then your father's father, do you remember his name?
Carl.
Oh. I'd love to hear more about your childhood. What kind of home did you live in growing up?
Well, my home was pretty much dominated by my mother. And I mean, my father was the head of the family and earned a living and never had a crossword for me. And we were very, I was very fond of him. He was very fond of me. But I could not complain to him about my mother. That was just improper, unacceptable. Other than that, he was very supportive, very gentle, very nice. Taught me a little bit about Schiller and Goethe, and he was interested in my Jewish education. They both were. I always felt he was genuine about it and serious. Not orthodox, just conservative Jew, but very serious about that identity. And and in the 30s in Vienna, when I was growing up, it was not much. That was not much of an issue. It was pretty tolerant, at least officially tolerant. Unofficially, before my time, Hitler learned his anti-Semitism in Vienna. That's where he learned it. And I think it was always there. But it was not acceptable in the 30s, up until 1938.
What was your awareness of this anti-Semitism as a child?
Relatively little. When we lived we didn't live in the Jewish section. We lived in what you would call an integrated neighborhood. Um, my parents had Jewish friends. Almost exclusively, because that's the way it was. My mother had a friend, I don't know from where, from long ago, who was married to a Christian. And that was unusual. Whatever other friends they had, I don't really know very much. It was mostly family because my father had, 4 siblings. My mother had 4 siblings. They were all in Vienna, mostly married. And spent a lot of time together. Um, my my father, my uncle, the one I went to in Glasgow, another uncle who was a brother, an older brother of my father. So my father, my uncle, the other uncle, and my grandfather, my paternal grandfather. Those 4 men got together and played cards every Wednesday night at my uncle's house. The women, my mother's sister was over at our house fairly often. She did not marry. She was the family old maid in Vienna.
We're going to take a little bit of a break for the card in the camera.
Thank you.
You were telling me about your mother's friends that would come over.
Well, she had one particular friend who was the one who was married to a Christian. And she would come over and visit my mother on Yom Kippur while my father was in the temple. My mother, I think my mother's religious feelings were shallow. And my father was quite serious about it.
So how did you practice Judaism within the home?
Well, we were not kosher. We had Friday night candles. And that had a beginning within my memory. And I think it was not really something that they were doing habitually before. It was for my benefit, for my education, something like that. And my father liked it. I think my mother really had little patience for it, but she did what he wanted.
What kind of schooling did you receive?
Public school. 4 years. Well, no, and there was a Jewish Saturday afternoon school at the local synagogue. Public school, very ordinary, but in 4 years from the age of 6 to 10, it's very ordinary public school. They managed to teach whatever American public schools managed to teach in 8 years. I, when we came here, at that time, um, and so that was up until the fall of '38. In the fall of, or maybe it was the fall of '37. In the fall of '37, I turned 10. So anyway, either 37 or 38. I then started secondary school, also public school. But at that point, French and Latin were part of the, well, and at that point, also at age 10, the education split into academic or general, you know. So I went academic, but then there was Latin, and I'd already had French lessons. I forget whether there was French in class or not. Anyway, I went to public school, started algebra and Latin.
What kind of friendships did you have?
I had one best friend, a Jewish girl, in public school. We went to the same school in the neighborhood, you know, a few blocks, 2 or 3 blocks away. I think you had to cross 1 or 2 streets between houses. But I saw her in school and occasionally after school.
What was her name?
Trude. And then there was another girl on my street across the street from me. Her name was Susie, but I was not really fond of her. And there was something the matter. I mean, I don't think she was retarded or anything like that, but she was not socially. I was not terribly much together socially, but I got by. But she was much less together socially, and she did not get by. So she was a little bit of an outcast. I didn't have much to. I was not above feeling above her. You know?
At what point did you start hearing about Nazi Germany?
Well, really, mainly when the Nazis took Austria, a little bit before, but not much. My parents did not discuss politics in front of me. One didn't do that because one didn't know what children would say. And in 1934, there was a social democratic government in Vienna, and there was an assassination attempt at the chancellor by Nazi groups who were not named to me, but I know subsequently that's what it was. He survived, but I have memory of being shocked at that. Everybody being shocked, and my parents were not at all politically active, but they were very serious about voting, and they were very serious about. They were really very serious about politics, but it wasn't discussed with me. Yeah.
Were you aware of what leanings they did have?
What?
Were you aware of what political leanings they did have?
There were no leanings, you know. I mean, they, that was that was not a subject of discussion. And I mean, there were social democrats. Everybody was a social democrat who wasn't a Nazi, and or Nazi sympathizers, because the Nazis rose in Germany in the 30s, but it didn't really directly affect Austria until 1938. And I mean, Austria is this little nothing country, um, but nobody thought anybody would do anything to anybody, you know. It was just until Hitler. As soon as Austria was really one of the first things he did was to annex Austria. Before that, it was, you know, not big news. It was not big news locally that, that reached my ears, except for when Dollfuss was almost assassinated in 1934, and that was not identified as a Nazi thing at the time. I didn't know. It was not discussed who did it. Um, Politics wasn't discussed. Was just not discussed.
Let's take a pause for a second. I feel like there's a lot of.
What's that? Where did we leave off? Or what do you want to hear next?
We left off, we started talking about how Germany affected Austria in 1938.
Oh, well, I sent you some of the stuff I wrote. Well, there's one about Anschluss. So that was 1938. I was just 11. I had the measles. So that was amalgamated in my mind, Hitler and the measles. But the common factor was that the drapes were drawn tight in the middle of the day, heavy drapes, which was not how it, which was not normal. And it was unclear whether it was because of the measles, where you want to keep out the light. Yeah, I mean, unmodified measles is before your time, but that was what you had to do. Or whether it was because Hitler was parading down the street, which was also going on at the same time. But I remember peeking out against orders, around the drapes to see what was going on because there was a lot of commotion. And the street was lined with Nazi flags. This was the day after the Anschluss. I mean, boom, like that. Out came the Nazi flags. So they must have been ready, you know. And a few days later, a week or so later, I went back to school. And there were the Nazi flags all over the classroom, all over. And that was shocking because that was obviously in readiness.
Did you feel any other changes after Anschluss?
Oh yeah. Well, of course, my parents were terribly upset. No, nobody discussed anything, but they didn't have to. My father, so I don't know the exact timing, but pretty soon my father lost his job. Jewish children couldn't go to public school anymore, so I lost schooling. Gentiles couldn't work for Jews, so we lost our maid, who had been my ally. And we had a house, so we lived in a flat in Vienna. But we had a house, my parents had a little architect designed house built within an hour's electric interurban ride of downtown in a little village where we had for when I was 5 or 6, when I was 6 or 7 years old, they built that. Then we went there for summers, and so we lost that. That was confiscated, and this was all within 2 months. So.
After you couldn't go to public school anymore, were you able to continue your schooling a different way?
Well, I would think there was certainly a gap for that was, so Anschluss was in March, so the rest of that academic year was gone. In the fall, so then came the edict that Jewish children couldn't go to public school anymore. So I guess I just wasn't in school. But there was one, I was ready for high school, secondary. I begun secondary school. So there was one Jewish secondary school in Vienna called Hayes. And somehow I got into that. I don't know whether one for the whole city, big city. I don't know whether it was competitive. I don't know how I got in, but I went there. And in the fall, for a little while, that was 1938, and that went on for a very short time, because then that ended with Kristallnacht, and that school was destroyed, and that was the end of schooling.
What do you remember of Kristallnacht?
Oh, a lot. Well, before, it was coming before it was coming for a day before it actually came. And I remember my father decided to it would be good to get out of Vienna. And so I remember him and this was November, all dressed up in his best heavy winter overcoat and hat, and he left. And he said he would be back soon, but he was going to take a train. We didn't know where. The idea was to get out of Vienna. Well, he and a few thousand other people had the same idea. And that night, the Nazis came and swept the train stations clean of Jews and put them in the city prison. But we didn't know that. We just lost contact. We had a telephone by then. We'd had a telephone for several years by then. And whatever arrangements they had made that he would be in touch, never happened. And so he was picked up, but we didn't know where or what. Just except that, a few thousand other Jews also disappeared. And that was what we knew, what I knew. And of course, there was a great deal of destruction besides, but not on our street. We were not in a Jewish neighborhood. And so it was not that obvious, except my father wasn't there and my mother was scared, and that was all we knew.
What ended up happening to your father?
Well, of course, he was in prison I don't know. There was a large armory in central Vienna dating back to, pre-World War I, I think. And so they herded all the men into that, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000, whatever. But we didn't know that. We didn't know anything. And then my mother got the word, and I don't know how, whether it was through the Jewish grapevine or the Jewish community center. There was an active Jewish community in Vienna that was still functioning to some extent. But somehow she found out that's where it was. And so we prepared, and that they didn't have any food. And so we prepared a package of, non-perishable food and went to this central armory, to a courtyard full of women with packages of food. And no way to get near the door. So the food just got past so salami and cheese and biscuits and cookies, chocolate. Chocolate was big. Chocolate is very good. It's a concentrated caloric food, And So I think the guards got a lot of it. And afterwards, my father said that he thought he saw some of it, but whether he did or whether he saw somebody else's salami and chocolate, who knows? And he certainly didn't get any of it. But so there he was, and we didn't know that. But we knew that every day truckloads of men were being taken to Dachau. So he was either there or in Dachau. And he was there. And after a few days, we had no news. This is all afterwards. After a few days, he somehow, the story I was told is that he fell. I don't think he fell. I think he was thrown down a flight of stairs from a water fountain. He was trying to get some water and dislocated his shoulder, but was not otherwise, and broke his glasses. And but was not otherwise terribly injured. But because of that, he was then stuck in the infirmary. Because as I thought about it years later, the Viennese hadn't really learned how to be proper Nazis yet. So when somebody was hurt, they put him in the infirmary, So he wasn't in with those other men anymore that were being shipped off to Dachau. We didn't know that. And so some length of time went by, maybe somewhere between a week and 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks. I don't know how long. And one day he appeared at the door, at our door. Haggard and dirty, and his arm was hanging uselessly by his side, but he was there, and he was otherwise okay. So they got a doctor who reduced the dislocation. It healed. He was okay after that. So he really escaped being shipped off, partly because of that dislocated shoulder, And I have to tell you that I have a personal theory. It's not terribly original, but if you write up any of these survivor stories, I don't believe it's adequately emphasized how the fact that we're here is just all a string of lucky accidents. Just happened that way. Could have happened the other way, but we're here because it happened this way, If it happened the other way, we would have been shipped off. So anyway, he came home because of that accident. And then after that, he was, I don't think, now this was only a week, 10 days, 2 weeks maybe at the most. No concentration camp, no Auschwitz, none of that. But I think he was traumatized for the rest of his life. He never got back the sparkle. He was all right. He functioned. He was fine. He didn't complain. He didn't have symptoms. But he was never quite the same.
How are you doing right now?
It's always hard.
Would you like some water? You want to take a break or
I don't
keep
think
going?
it would make any difference. If I get incoherent, you have to tell me.
You got it. So after Kristallnacht, what happened to you next?
Well, there are some gaps in my memory. And as I've mentioned before, nothing much was discussed with children, especially not at that time. I mean, it was considered that would have been dangerous. I mean, I was perfectly reliable, but I was a child, and I would have known to keep my mouth shut. But you didn't. I can understand that you didn't know what was going to happen. And in general, like people in the underground told afterwards, the less you know, the better for you. So I don't know, didn't know anything. I was at home, and at some point, so that was November, December, at some point, my parents had me, oh, oh, but I knew we were going to emigrate, and we were on the waiting list for the US. And there was a big crate in the kitchen that was being packed of household goods. At that time, the Nazis wouldn't let you take out money or commercial things of value, but they would let you take out household goods. So there was this big crate of linens and pots and pans and glassware and crystal and some of that is a couple of pieces of crystal of heavy bohemian hand cut glass that they put in everything they had, they put in there. Big wooden crate. And the Nazis would let you take that out. So long as it was all used household goods. And so they packed that. They were packing that, and the excuse was, and of course we no longer had a maid. And I no longer had school. So they, in order to get me out of the way, they parked me with an aunt and uncle in the outer districts. Now, we were in the third district, which was pretty central. Not the Jewish, not Leopoldstadt, but just the third district next door, but across the Danube Channel already. But they parked me with an aunt and uncle who were in one of the outer districts of Vienna, which was more modest, more goyish, safer, really. But I was out of their hair. And it had my 5-year-old cousin. So I even had another. I mean, she was like a baby sister. So I lived with them for a number of weeks, during which my parents were, quotes, packing. But what I didn't know is they'd also been made to vacate our flat. So I never saw that flat again because I was there um, from whenever, December, January. And then one day my parents showed up. Oh, well, we had still had telephones, functioning telephones. But anyway, one day they came to pick me up and said, "You're going to go to your aunt and uncle in Glasgow." That was the Kindertransport. I didn't know anything about that. I don't know how they got the. I know now that the tickets had to be purchased, that there was competition for them. There were more people who wanted to get their children on than could. I don't know how they did it, or how much they had to pay, or whom they had to bribe, or anything like that. But they got me on. And tomorrow we're taking you to the train, or tonight we're taking you to the train. And so they did. And that was February 1939. And I didn't know anything about the Kindertransports, but you probably do. Well, they began in December of 1938 through the activities of the international Jewish community and the British communities, British Jewish communities somehow, so that the British Parliament passed a special act permitting 10,000 children to come to Great Britain. Otherwise, you couldn't get in. But they said they would accept 10,000 children. And that led to the organization of the Kindertransport, which began in December 1938 and ran until the beginning of the war. And they got out almost 10,000 children. And I was one of them in February.
What did you bring with you?
What you were allowed. What you were allowed was a suitcase about this big, and the clothes on your back, possibly 2 or 3 layers of clothes. and I had a teddy bear this size. Had to be small. Couldn't be this. I had a teddy bear like this. Couldn't do that. I had one like this. And self-addressed postcards that my father had written, so I could. And I have some of those postcards, and you might want a picture, or I can give you a picture, that I wrote on the train. And once we got on the train, we couldn't get off, but there were stops. I mean, the trains had to stop in those days. And they would take mail off, so that I've 2 or 3 postcards that were written from the train and mailed in Germany. The train from Vienna, Central Europe, and then the train had to travel through across Germany over to the Rhineland, and then up the Rhine to Holland, to cross the border into Holland. And that was a whole day was 24 hours or 36 hours or more, uninterrupted, except for train stops, uninterrupted. But they took mail off the train, and so I have these. I have a postcard postmarked Nuremberg, and, well, or two someplace else, Stuttgart maybe.
How did you pass the time on the train?
Looking out the window. So when the train went through towns, the shades were drawn. When it went through the countryside, you could look out the window. And in one of my postcards, I complained about the endless evergreen forests. All you could see was pine trees, you know. And when it was a community, you couldn't look out because they didn't want people to look in.
Who else was with you in the car?
Other children. One or two adults per train, per car. As far as I can remember, everybody was well behaved. Few children cried. No, nobody did, you know. Children understand. I understand a lot when you gotta shut up and just do what you have to do. And so there was nothing. I think we each had a little bit of food with us, a little bit of, not even, I don't remember toys or games or anything. No, nobody had any kinds of fits or temper tantrums, nothing. I mean, in the railroad station before when I was, the departure was at night, at 11:30 at night. That was when the Nazis would allow the trains to leave because they didn't want the population to see that. I don't think it was, you know, before the war. This was still before Munich, if you know the history. I mean, Hitler was still trying to make it look as though Germany was a civilized Western country. So as though what they were doing, you know, was their internal politics, and that was really nobody else's business internationally. That was the official posture. So they were trying to look reasonably civilized. So the train went through the, you know, border, nominal border controls, and uneventfully. And the big event was that once we crossed the border, we all knew we were out. It was night, and very soon after the border, we arrived in a little town in Holland. And the station was crowded with women who came and handed hot orange juice. the window and cookies to the children. And I was just floored. And later on, I told this account, you know, as you can imagine before. I told it to the man from the Jewish Museum in Berlin, and he said, "Oh, they did that to all the trains." You know, okay, the Dutch did that, and so then the train got through Holland and onto the ferry headed for London. Horrible, horrible channel crossing. I promised myself I would never cross the channel again. And I never did. On water. Never. So by air or by tunnel, but not by water.
What was it like arriving in London?
Well, we were being shepherded. Most of the children went to some hostel kind of place, which I didn't know about. I really didn't know anything. I knew I was going to Glasgow to my aunt and uncle. I knew I was going to London first. That's about all I knew. And when we got there, it was nighttime. And there you are on a big train station, still with a label around your neck, I'm sure. and but then all the children got off the train, and then all the children were pretty much gone. And I thought, well, you know, where was I going? Well, somebody came and took me, and I was taken in an elegant. I was picked up by an elegant chauffeur, taken with an elegant car to an elegant house of some Jewish committee lady, you know, who put up, I think, maybe me and another child that night. And in the morning, somebody else came in. Somebody took charge, and we were given postcards on the train. We were given postcards to send home, and must be that when we arrived in London, we were also given postcards, because I have a postcard with a return address to the Jews' shelter in London. Well, I never went to the Jews' shelter in London, so I don't know if somebody passed out postcards, sent them for us to send home, and I wrote it and said I was in London and everything was fine. And anyway, we stayed in this house. I'm distracted because I think it's raining behind you. And so we were put on a train in the morning. There was me and another girl, who were put on the train to Glasgow. And which was several hours, 5 or 6 or 7 hour train ride. And another child, I think probably from the St. Children's Transfer, just one girl. We were put in a compartment with two English ladies, who of course spoke no German, and we spoke no English, except we could say yes and no and please and thank you. They bought us tea, and they understood enough. Somehow we communicated where we came from and what we were doing there, which was now, you know, just trying to get to the next station, and we got to Glasgow later on that day, and my two aunts were there to meet the train, much to my surprise, but they were there. So that's the end of the Kindertransport. And then I was with family again.
What was it like living with Uncle Joseph and Aunt Nellie?
Oh, I loved, you know, it was nice. I mean, he was my favorite uncle. Well, he only had two nieces, but I was his favorite niece. And everybody loved me, and I loved everybody. It was fine. My only worry was that my parents were still in Vienna. My father, I felt, was in danger all the time. Of course, so was my mother, but I didn't really know that. But they were there, and that was the problem.
So, what ended up happening with your parents?
Another story.
Actually, let's take a break here. We'll come back, talk about your parents and the St. Louis and what happened. Tell me how your parents got out of Vienna.
Well, in the spring of 19, first of all, we didn't know how they would get out. Um, uh, we were on the waiting list for an American quota, but that was, you know, going to be of unknown length of time. And so we didn't know. And I was in Glasgow at the time. They were in Vienna. And and the big worry was how they would get out. And then one day I got a letter. We got a letter that they had gotten some tickets on a ship called the St. Louis, and they would be going to Cuba. Well, we actually knew people who had gone to Cuba to wait for an American quota to come around, and so that seemed a reasonable thing. So they booked passage on that ship and got we got so from our end we got a telegram that they had made it to Hamburg, which is you know, at least 30-hour train trip from Vienna, and that was already a big relief because many things could in Nazi Germany, many things could happen while you were on the train going through Germany. So they made it to Hamburg, and then we got a telegram that they'd boarded the ship. And that was a big deal. And then, of course, there was going to be the crossing, which was at that time was between 1 and 2 weeks, well, close to 2 weeks in good weather. And this was still good. This was May, and the North Atlantic was probably good weather, so it was probably going to be all right. And so they sailed for, they did it. We got a telegram that they'd made it to the ship. And then I think another one, at that time the ship would leave Hamburg and stop in France, Holland or France, make port, and then go out to the Atlantic. So we knew that they made it out of European waters. And so that was great. And then there would be no news, for several weeks. That was expected. And I have a letter that I wrote, I have a letter that my father wrote later from the St. Louis so they got to Cuba, then they couldn't land, and they were in the harbor for something like, I don't know, several weeks, 6 weeks, something like that, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. Some people just off the coast, and then the Cubans didn't like that, so then the ship had to cruise off the coast of Florida, but couldn't land. I mean, they were like this close, but couldn't land. Some people jumped overboard to try to swim to Florida. That didn't work. Then the ship turned around. Several of the men jumped overboard and committed suicide. Then they established a suicide watch. And my father was on that. They didn't want people jumping overboard to commit suicide. I mean, I can see why they would do that rather than go back to Germany. And but Jews don't believe in that. And reasonable people don't believe in that, because you always might have a chance to escape. But the ship was headed back to Hamburg, and during that time, I don't know how much was in the newspapers. If it was, my family kept it from me. I just knew they were on the way to Havana, and it would take umpteen weeks before any correspondence came back. So eventually, the ship got back to Europe. Eventually, a talented negotiator from, I don't know, from the Joint Distribution Committee, or a talented Jewish negotiator, got the governments of Britain, France, Netherlands, and Belgium to agree to take 1/4 of the passengers of the ship each. I mean, these are tiny numbers. I mean, like less than 1,000 passengers into 4 countries. I mean, you would think that's not a big deal, but it was a big deal. No, nobody wanted nobody wanted to do it. So it was a big accomplishment. And so then here were these passengers to be divided up between 4 countries. No staff on the ship. Nobody was expecting this. So how were they going to do this? Nobody knows how they did it. And my children were always so everybody who had any sense at all wanted to go to Great Britain because they all knew what would happen on the continent. Everybody except the Americans knew that. And so how did they manage? How did my family manage to get to England? Well, nobody. So my assumption was always that they had a place to go. They had a child in Great Britain, so that would be the natural. That would be a natural. When in fact that was not a given at all. The man at the Holocaust Museum said, well, but the Holocaust Museum, by the way, published a book on the St. Louis. One man had a brother in London. He didn't get to go to England, all kinds of things. My children were convinced because my mother was an aggressive woman with a big mouth. She got them on. And that may very well be the truth. We don't know. But they did manage to get routed to Southampton. I didn't know it. We didn't know any of this. This was all, in a matter of days or weeks, and communications were minimal. I mean, they knew that the ship had been turned around, but nobody knew what would be happening. And then I guess they got a telegram that my parents had landed in Southampton. And they were, next thing, a few hours later, they were in Glasgow. And I didn't know any of this until they walked in the door. So.
When was this?
Well, that would have been June, or late May or early June, 1939. So the war started, 2 or 3 months later. So it was just in the nick of time.
Where did your parents stay when they came to Glasgow?
In my uncle's flat. We were all in his flat. And so it was my uncle and his wife and my other aunt, his sister, and then and me, and then when my parents came, and then there was another couple, not who shared the flat. They had, I don't know what used to be the parlor or something like that, but they shared the flat. Not Jewish, but must have been socialists in Vienna, and so they were there. So that was like 7 people in the flat. It sounds crowded. I didn't think it was crowded. It was England and Scotland were a different standard of living, enough space than Central Europe. I mean, in the city it was like this. Glasgow, is still Europe, but there was more space in England and Scotland. There was just more space. So it doesn't sound like a big flat, but it seemed big to me. And it had several outstanding characteristics. It had hot water that came out of the faucet, which we didn't, which everybody in Great Britain had. And only the rich, really rich, and I don't even know if they had running hot water. At least they had running water in the bathroom. We didn't. My father had to have running water put into the kitchen when I was small. Before that, you had to go out into the stairwell to get water, cold water. Anyway, for for reasons not so clear to me, the standard of living was considerably better on the average in Great Britain for the middle class than in Vienna pre-war. So we had running water. We also had mice. No, we did not have mice in Vienna, but everybody in Glasgow had mice. Everybody. They probably had rats too, but I didn't know that. It's a port city. All port cities had rats, but everybody had mice. So it made my aunts hysterical. I thought it was kind of funny. So
How were you treated when you were in Glasgow as a newcomer? What were your feelings of how you were treated?
oh well, well, very well actually. I was in school. I was enrolled in school. Of course, the Scottish teachers were nice. I remember one or two particularly nice. The English teacher took a great deal of trouble with me. The extra help. Uh, I didn't need extra help in anything else. Uh, that was very kind, but it was, you know, that society was here. Um, we were not particularly, even in the Jew. I don't think we even belonged to a synagogue. There was no time for that. I mean, everybody was busy trying to make a living and learn English, and yeah, we all knew we were Jewish, and it was no issue. And so it was never an issue in Great Britain at that time at all. Uh, Not that the British were unacquainted with anti Semitism, but we didn't experience it.
Talk to me about when the war started, a few months after your parents came. What was that like?
Well, the war was declared, and the British were very concerned about the cities being bombed. So there was an immediate uh, organization to evacuate the children from the cities, and it was voluntary, but I guess I was asked. I don't remember being asked, but certainly the families were asked, and if they wanted, their children could be evacuated into the countryside. So I was evacuated into a little Scottish town, a big farm. I'd never been, I mean, I might have been on a farm passing by on a summer vacation in the Austrian Alps, and seen a cow or two. And that, that would have, but this was a big farm with big sheep herd and a barn with cows and milking machines and a bull and lots of sheep. And I guess the families must have elected to receive a child from the city. So they had a daughter about my age. There's absolutely, not absolutely, but predominantly no communication. They spoke with a broad Scottish accent, Highland Scottish accent. I had just learned, I was making my way through English, and culturally, it was like this, but they were nice. They I think they had agreed to accept a child from the city to be evacuated. I don't think they bargained for an immigrant child, but they accepted me. They were nice, and the girl, the daughter of the house, and I had absolutely nothing to say to each other. Couldn't if we tried, and I slept I'd never slept in a bed with anybody else. So I slept in a bed with her and her grandmother, and who smelled. And I'd never even encountered anybody who smelled, even at close quarters. And but the dad took me around the farm and showed me the sheep and how the sheep got dipped, and there was big rolling grass covered hill. So I was in a totally strange world. And then I got sent to school with the girl of the family, which was in a nearby village. You had to, I don't know how we got, must have been a bus, or maybe the dad took us to school. I can't remember. It was only a few weeks, but I did go to school there. The Scottish accent, the Highland Scottish speech, although it was English, I could not understand. Couldn't understand a word. The way the children spoke and the teachers, I couldn't understand a word. But I went for a few weeks, and came home, whatever the transportation was, and I got through it. I didn't feel bad about it. I just You did what you had to do, and at the moment, that was what I had to do. You know,
What was the name of this town?
Turriff, Turriff, and it's on the map near Aberdeen, Scotland, which is a bigger city, but it was Highlands.
What was the name of the family that took you in?
Baxter.
And how long approximately did you stay with them?
Well, so it began right at the beginning of the war, within days, and it ended. So that would have been September. I don't know exactly when it ended, but it ended when my parents got no. My parents were in Glasgow in the meantime, and they got notice that the American quota had come up. When the American quota came up, you went. I mean, like as soon as you could get on the ship. So the word came, come home, come to Glasgow, and we landed in New York. The only fixed date is that we landed in New York on November 1st. Much too, oh, yeah, because the 1939 World's Fair had closed on October 31st. And I had hoped we would make it to the World's Fair, but we didn't. So we got there on November 1st. So however long it took, in those days it must have been at least a week and a half, at least, maybe 2 weeks to cross the Atlantic. It was a North Atlantic in October. It was a rough weather. We were on an American ship. America was neutral, but England was at war, and there were U-boats. And we always felt the U-boats could make. I mean, they would not intentionally blow up an American ship. That would be a bad idea, but they could make a mistake, and so it was not without a certain feeling of, hazard. But nothing happened. It was stormy. Everybody was seasick, except my father. And I have a nice little vignette memory of everybody being in their cabin, being seasick, including my mother. But my father was up on the deck, and so he said, why don't you come up? It was windy and cold and maybe a little rainy, but it was nicer up there than down below. Why don't you come up? So I got bundled up and I went upstairs and we stood at the railing and looked out, and I felt better. And was still a little seasick. And he said, don't look down. Look over there. Look straight ahead. If you look hard enough, maybe you'll see New York. So, got me through. Excuse me, I'm having a cramp in my leg.
Oh, good. Let's pause. So you can feel good. Do you want to get up? Tell me about landing at New York City.
Well, really very little. It was just a big crowded scene. we were being with a I don't know how big the ship was, but it had quite a few passengers. But eventually we were let off, and we were being met by a cousin of my mother's, who was already in New York, who had been instrumental in getting us our affidavits and entry with the assistance of the Jewish Committee, a lot with the assistance of Jewish Family, of whatever it was called then, Jewish Family and Children's, or its ancestor. It was all the Jewish agencies were under the umbrella of the American Joint Distribution Committee, known for short as the Joint. The Joint got us out, the Joint got my parents' tickets facilitated, the Joint got us in connection with the Jewish Committee in New York, and then it was Jewish Family and Children's, or whatever its immediate ancestor was. It was the Jewish community, but it was really the Jewish Committee that facilitated. I mean, the American immigration, was cumbersome. You had to have an American citizen sponsor with verifiable property who would agree to undertake to support the family so that you would be guaranteed not to become a public charge. Well, we didn't know anybody. People who were coming who were Hitler refugees didn't know anybody. A lot of this was facilitated by the Jewish Committee, who would network with well-to-do American Jews who would say they would be responsible for this immigrant family, with the understanding that they didn't really have to be. It was really the committee would deal with it. So we didn't even know who it was until some time later. There was a ceremonial visit where we went to their house to meet our sponsors, once. American immigration is a weird system, and it hasn't gotten any better. Parenthetical.
Where did you stay in New York City?
Well, first of all, my mother's cousin who met us, but he had a tiny apartment. So then they found us a sublet. I don't know whether it was him or the Jewish Committee, some sublet on East 110th Avenue, which I didn't know this at the time, but it's really almost the Black Ghetto. We didn't know that, but it was. But it was a relatively not a slum, but a relatively poor, lower middle class neighborhood, and a sublet in that, complete with not mice this time, but rats and cockroaches, which I'd never encountered in my life. which sent my mother up the wall right along with the cockroaches. and um, and bed bugs, which bit me at night. And that was not so funny.
Did you start going to school in New York?
Brief, yeah. Wherever we were, I immediately started going to school. And the main thing I did in New York was get appendicitis. And so my real introduction to American culture was in Mount Sinai Hospital, children's ward. I had an appendectomy. In those days, you were hospitalized for 10 days. So there I was in an open children's ward. And one of the children had a radio, which was very advanced. Most children didn't have radios of their own in those days. He had a radio, which he played during the day. And the main thing I remember from that radio is the Green Hornet. Now, that was probably before your time, but the Green Hornet is of a vintage with early Superman. The Green Hornet. But what in the world was the Green Hornet? What turned out it was a man, it was a person in a costume. It looked sort of like Batman costume, but it was a little before Batman. Who could crawl up and down buildings, building walls, which was a hornet. But it was a man. And so that was one of the shows. I couldn't figure out what that was, but it was, 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week. and then there was The Shadow. And that was a little more comprehensible. And I think Superman was beginning about then. So those were the 3 things I learned in New York. and then after the hospital, again through the Jewish community, somehow I got sent into a children's convalescent place outside, not in Manhattan, but out of maybe, I don't know where it was, Bronx or out of Brooklyn or something like that. And for another 3 or 4 weeks. And so that was more American culture. But so I just about got out of that when the Jewish committee asked my father if he would be interested in going to California. And he said yes. Their interest was to get the immigrants out of New York. It was still 1939, early January 1940. There were still the end of the Depression, no jobs. And if you could get the immigrants out of New York, which they didn't want to do, but if you could get them to go, then the chances would be better. So he said yes. so we came to San Francisco. And no job. So I went to school in New York for, this long. Then I went to school in San Francisco for
Was
this
it,
long.
oh, because it was it San Francisco that you came to, or was it Stockton?
Well, first it was San Francisco.
Mm.
And the Jewish committee at that time was in pretty much the same place as it still is in San Francisco, near where Mount Zion is now. And they got us a little apartment somewhere near, not far from there. And I went to school there. By this time it was junior. It would have been junior. In San Francisco, it would have been junior high. But there was nothing, no jobs, nothing in San Francisco either. So then they asked my father, would you go to Stockton, California? Well, he said yes. I mean, maybe there would be some jobs there, certainly more space and less crowded, and not so many immigrants and so on. So he said yes. So we went to Stockton, California. And to me, that was really the worst time, the most estranging time of the whole immigration. It was not a big city. I'd always lived in a big city. Yeah, they spoke English. I spoke pretty good English by that time, but I didn't know the culture. Nobody knew the culture, but when you were a kid, you know, ninth or 10th grade, that makes a lot of difference. It made so much more difference than it did in New York, where I also was new. I was, we were all greenhorns in New York, but it was fine. It was just like not far from home. Stockton was another country, and I think it was probably the most difficult part of the acculturation.
Did your parents manage to find work?
Well, in a creative sort of way. The Jewish committee consisted of a very small group. This was the Reformed Jewish community. I'd never encountered anything like that the first time but they were cordial. They were the ones who brought us there. They were the ones who had the money. So, and they supported us to begin with. And some creative soul. There were no jobs. It was still pre-war in this country. No jobs. Some creative soul found out that my father knew about gardening. He knew that because we had the house in the country, and he had made that garden. He had made it from raw land on up. So he knew gardening from the, bottom up, so to speak. And they found that out. So they bought him a 1931 Chevrolet coupe with a rumble seat. Do you know what that is? A rumble seat and a set of used garden tools. And he went to work as a self-employed gardener. And one of the members of the well-to-do Jewish community was an obstetrician. Oh, and my mother really went out to do house cleaning. My mother, who'd had a maid all her life, went out to do house cleaning. And somehow the Jewish obstetrician, who was one of the pillars of the Jewish community, got her into his household. I don't know. Oh, and his wife was going to have a baby. And so she needed help. And would she come and help her? So she said, well, she didn't know any of the modern techniques, bottles and sterilization and all that. He said, I mean, you had a child, you know what? Oh, but she didn't know any of that. He said, I will teach you. So he taught her, making formula and all that. And she came and so the job was to do everything. I don't think she had to do the cleaning, but you cook for the family. You take care of the mother when she comes home from the hospital. You take care of the baby. That's all. 20 hours a day, I don't think she had to do the cleaning. But she had started out going to people's houses to clean houses. So this was an improvement over that. So they were ecstatic about the Viennese cuisine. And Stockton never had it so good. And she could even bake. And occasionally she would bake. And so after she did that, she had all these newborn baby jobs from this obstetrician that she could handle. And, I have to hand it to her. She had not really had done any serious work all her adult life. She worked hard when she was a girl until she got married. And she had a hard youth. But after that, my father took care of her, and she never did a lick of work, for years. And then all of a sudden, boom. And she did it. She did it for several years.
For you during this difficult time, did you at any point feel like it became easier?
Not really. I feel now in retrospect, when I'm doing all this writing, I think my emigration odyssey ended in 1944 when I came to Berkeley as an undergraduate. Before Stockton was purgatory, and we got through it. I got through it. My family got through it. But it was not nice. And the Jewish community was nice and trying to be helpful, but the Jewish community that brought us to Stockton, but upper middle class, reform, snooty Jews, who were the nicest one of them was the richest lady, who was the committee lady who facilitated everything. She was rich and she worked hard. So she facilitated the immigrants and she was nice to us, you know, but other than that, my only contact, our only contact with them it was a Reform congregation. Reform was not anything I was acquainted with. The first time I went there, I went into the synagogue. I thought I'd made a mistake and gone to the wrong place because an organ was playing. And I thought I'd come into a church by mistake. And nevertheless, that was the congregation that supported us. And then my father did the gardening, and my mother did the what was called baby nursing. And eventually my father got a job with the Fiber Board, which is a local affiliate of Zellerbach in Stockton. It was a shipping clerk job. It was an awful job, I think. But they made it. They made it. And I got through. I got through high school, and I made it in 3.5 years. And by that time, my father managed to get transferred to San Francisco. And San Francisco was, you know, the holy grail compared to Stockton, you know, if you pardon the Christian imagery, or pagan, or whatever it was. So we moved to San Francisco. I came to Berkeley as an undergraduate. And I feel when I came here, well, the first semester, it was wartime. It was 3 semesters a year, 3 full semesters a year. And I came in February of 44. By the time the war was over, 45, June of 45, I had finished 2 years of college, and I was ready to be a junior, and I was in pre-med, and I stopped feeling like an immigrant. Yeah. And I feel that was the end of feeling like an immigrant.
So you studied pre-med in Berkeley.
Well, I registered in chemistry. I liked chemistry. I also liked biology, but I liked chemistry. Then after the first semester, I found out you had to do calculus in chemistry. And as far as I was concerned, that was the end of chemistry. Oh, you have to do physics. I got through most of physics, but then you had to do calculus. And at that point, by that time, I'd been around for a couple of years. I'd made some friends, like some of whom were pre-med students. And I discovered I liked the biological sciences. I did not like chemistry and physics and calculus. I did not like any of those things. And but I liked biology and I liked zoology and I liked embryology and all anatomy and all those things. So I applied to medical school. And I have to just to backtrack. I always thought, like when I was in high school, I thought I wanted to be a nurse. I always thought that during the war, I wanted to be a war nurse, a Red Cross nurse. Then I found out something about the hierarchy of nurses in hospitals. It was not so good. Doctors seem to have a much better deal. I did not, so I applied to medical school at the ripe old age of 18 or 19. And I didn't know it at the time, so people who apply to medical school apply to lots of medical schools in the hope of getting in somewhere. I didn't have that option. I could afford to go to Berkeley, San Francisco, if I was lucky, or nothing. Those were the choices. So I applied to medical school. The first year you could apply was when you were a junior, undergraduate junior. And the interviewer, first of all, what I didn't know at the time is that each class, so the medical school classes were fixed numbers, like 72 spots a year. And it was denied that there was a quota system. It just so happened that every class of 70 or 72 had about 7 women. 7. Out of the 7, it just so happened that there was one Jewish woman. And I didn't get in that year, which was just as well. I was really very young, really ridiculously young. But the interviewer said to me, the interviewer for admission, how do we know that you are not going to team up with one of your classmates and get married and have children? Yeah, you look surprised. You could ask those questions in those days, And I said, you don't know that. You could ask me, how do I know? I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know. I didn't get in. And the following year I was a year older, and they thought maybe I was serious because I applied a second time. Anyway, I got it, or there were not so many women applying. I don't know. Many years later, I made a friend of the woman in the year ahead of me. And so years later, she said to me, I always felt very guilty about you. I said, guilty about me? So she said, I was the Jewish woman who got in that year. That's why you didn't get in. And she was a year older. She was actually smarter, but she was also older. So,
What kind of medicine did you study?
well, it was just all kinds of. I mean, medicine was general, uh, and the internship that you could do general or you could do already specialty oriented in those days, and UCSF had internal medicine internship, which was easier than a general hospital internship, which is brutal. I mean, the interns were uh, exploited free labor, really. Uh, UCSF was not so brutal. So I did I did the internship in medicine there, and then a residency, maybe a year in internal medicine, and then psychiatry. And,
What kind of work did you do as a psychiatrist?
well, I had a private practice. I always had usually had a part-time job, um, because to start a private practice, if you didn't have any other means of support, you have to have something to live on. When you start a private practice, you don't have anything to live on. So I always had a half-time job for the county or the state, something. And then finally, just private practice. Mostly office practice. I mean, if I had a patient who had to be hospitalized, I I could. Herrick used to have a psychiatric ward, and yeah, and occasionally I had a patient there.
Can you tell me about how you met your husband?
Oh, that's easy. um, when I got through my internship, I somehow I'd gotten some state subsidy, and I owed the state. I had to become a state employed physician, and I got a half-time job. So I could have gone to work at a state hospital, which would have been the last resort. But I got a half-time job at UCSF, Langley Porter, at the psychiatric hospital there. And my first job was to be the senior resident in charge of hosting the incoming new residents. And so on July 1st of whatever year that was, I could count back and tell you, but I graduated in 1951. It was middle 50s, late 50s. On the 1st of July, which is when the new residency started, my job was to welcome the new residents, and there was a 4 o'clock or something like that, 4 o'clock reception for the incoming residents. And I was standing on the stairs waiting to welcome them, and up the stairs comes hurrying this young man who had just driven a little gaunt looking. He had just driven across the country in 3 days in order to make it. The 1st of July was the magic day. And that was Harry. And well, he seemed attractive, but there are lots of attractive young men around. But he was attractive. And so he came up the stairs, and I remember looking at him and directing him and, hosting the new incoming. So that's how I met him.
When did you two get married?
Not for a long time. There were many professional and other hurdles. So I met him in something like 1955 or 58 or something like that, 59. We didn't, no, not 59. Early 50s. We got married in 1959. So it was a few years, it was a protracted courtship. I won't specify who courted whom. It was unclear. And anyway, we got married in 1959.
Can you tell me Harry's full name?
Harry Weinstein. Middle initial was S, as in Saul, which was important because there was a Jewish internist established. Everybody knew who Harry Weinstein was. And it wasn't my Harry Weinstein. It was a guy who was 10 or 20 years older, and well-established, well-known internist in San Francisco.
Where was Harry from?
Buffalo, New York.
Was he born there?
Yeah. Where was Buffalo? Buffalo. Where was Buffalo?
When was Harry born?
1928.
Is he still with us?
Oh, no. No. He died in 98. Long time ago.
Sorry, just to make sure, 1998?
1998.
Thank you. So the two of you married. Where did you two settle down?
Well, the very first year, we lived in Sausalito in a cute little rented house. And we would have liked to stay there. In fact, we offered to buy it. By that time, he had a little money. I was working. We offered to buy the house. She wouldn't sell. A cute little house with with $1 million view, in Sausalito, looking at the bay. She wouldn't sell. So by that time I was pregnant, and for me the clock was ticking. I wasn't young anymore. I got married. I was going to have a baby, and so I was pregnant, so she wouldn't sell. So we shopped around for a house. We bought a house in San Francisco. We'd no sooner made the down payment or signed the contract or whatever it was, um, then she turned around and said she's willing to sell to us. Well, we couldn't afford two houses, so we couldn't buy the house in Sausalito anymore. So we went to San Francisco. So we lived in San Francisco for until Sam was 6, almost 6. And Rebecca was 3 and 3.5.
So let's talk about your children. How many do you have?
2.
Who was born first?
Sam and Rebecca. Sam first. Rebecca second. Sam was named after Harry's grandfather. He wouldn't name him after his father. He didn't like his father. But after, and my father was still alive, so you don't name people. You don't name children after living parents, So it was named after Harry's grandfather.
When was Sam born?
1960.
And what is Sam's full name?
Samuel Joseph Weinstein.
And when was Rebecca born?
62.
And what's Rebecca's full
October
name?
62. And Rebecca was named because Rebecca is one of my favorite names. That's all. Not after anybody.
Does she have a middle name?
Natalie, yeah.
And I'm sorry, she was born October of 62. What month was Sam born in? March. What do your kids do today?
My kids are in their 60s. Sam is a nurse. He's still working. So Sam is 63 now. He's a nurse and still working full time. And he means to work another year or 2, I think. And Rebecca is nominally an artist. She's not doing much art now. Her chief occupation is that she's living her life as she pleases. She doesn't have a job. She has a partner. And she and I bought a house many years ago in North Oakland with the idea that it would be a place for her to live. She came out from New York, and and I had the idea it would be nice for her to have a house. So we bought a house. But when it was not really in Berkeley. It was North Oakland, when it was still affordable. And so now she rents it out. I should say it was an old house. it needed everything. And we 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 contracted out. It needed. It was 1906, you know, and we contracted out the plumbing and the electricity and the roof, I guess. And she did everything else in that house. I mean, that's what she did for a year. She did everything else. And our deal was, I'll I'll pay for the supplies, you supply the labor, and it worked.
Do you have any grandchildren?
No,
And I want to ask, when your parents passed away, when did your father pass away?
well, 1975.
And your mother?
My mother was over 100, so I have trouble telling you the year. About 90. It could have been 1998, something like that. Yeah, because she was born in 1895, so and she was over 100 years, so late 90s.
And how long did you keep your practice open?
Oh, a long time. Well, I had I used to have a part-time practice and part-time jobs. Eventually, I gave up the part-time jobs. And and when my husband got really sick, I closed my practice before that. So in the late 90s.
Let's see. What effect, if any, have your experiences had on your perspective on the world, do you think?
Oh my God, I can't. That's very hard to answer. What comes to me is a line from Gilbert and Sullivan. Every boy and girl alive was born a little liberal or a little conservative. That's it. and and I think I was a little liberal when I was 10 years old. When I had to be shushed once or twice by my parents because I have to say something politically questionable in public in a loud voice. So about that long.
Did you ever go back and revisit your hometown, Vienna, after the war?
Yeah, not for a long time. It's an interesting question. We traveled in Europe many times, beginning in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. I refused to go to Germany or Austria. And then in the late 80s, so when did the Berlin Wall come down? About 1989. Of course, we didn't know that ahead of time, although we might have, but it was in the air. But I think I mentioned for 40 years, nobody wrote or talked about their exodus or about the war years or World War II. We traveled in Europe, France, Italy. We went to Israel. I would not go to Germany or Berlin or Vienna at all. And my husband wanted to. He very much wanted to. He wanted to see the art and some of the architecture, but mostly the art. So one year, some good friends of ours, he was an academic, and he had a summer not a sabbatical, but a summer school thing in Germany, in Bavaria, near Munich. And my husband really wanted to go to Germany, and I really didn't want to go to Germany. But we agreed. We flew into Berlin, into West Berlin. We looked at the art, and we flew out. And I knew other people who had driven through Germany. I wouldn't do that. And then we met our friends in southern France or Switzerland. But we had taken the train or flown into Munich. And I agreed to stay there for 2 or 3 days. My husband wanted to go to the museum in Munich, all right? And then we were going to meet them in Switzerland. Well, in downtown Munich, the day we got up, the next day we got up out of the hotel, walked downtown. There's a streetcar in downtown Munich, at least there was then, a regular old streetcar, and the label on it said Dachau. I was just speechless. I said, that's why I didn't want to go to Germany. I thought the shamelessness of it. Okay, Dachau is outside Munich. But they could have changed the name. And so I said, that's why I wouldn't go to Germany. And I still wouldn't. And I didn't. West Berlin, yes. But that was it. And then I didn't go back. Even then I wouldn't go. My husband never did go to Vienna with me because I just would not go to Vienna. But then eventually, the Austrians had Nazi governments, in the 80s and 90s. I think in the year 2000, they had an election and they got a social democrat government. And somehow, I don't know, oh, somehow I was forced to get into touch with the Austrian embassy because my children, my daughter, first of all, wanted a passport. She was eligible for an Austrian passport because of me. And if I would cooperate, she could get an Austrian passport, which would give her a European community passport. And that was what she wanted. So I said, okay. So I got into touch with the Austrian bureaucracy. And I actually had some cordial conversations. And we actually eventually got it done. And then my son wanted it too. And that then was easier because by that time it was later. And I knew the ropes, I'd already done it once.
Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you would like to mention?
Well, I can't really think of much that I haven't mentioned. I mean, what comes to me again is something I've already talked about, but it comes to my mind again. How this didn't come up for all these years. It's not only me, because in 1990, what was it? Well, I can't remember. It was but in the 1980s maybe, not 90s. But there came a time, so the back to the Kindertransport, which would have been 39, 50 years after that, we've been 89. 40 years was too soon. It was in maybe a couple of years shy of 50 years. There began to be a movement to reestablish connections. And it was the Kindertransport connection that first got in touch with me. Not Holocaust survivors or anything, but Kindertransport. They were going to have a reunion. They were having reunions. They were trying to have they had a reunion in England from 39. Must have been 89, possibly 79. But it was, anyway, 1 year it was in London. The following year it was in New York. The year after that it was in San Francisco. So it took that long to make it to the West Coast. But eventually there was a Kindertransport reunion here in Emeryville. And survivors went with their families. My husband wouldn't go. Not interested. Rebecca was in New York. Sam, we were not. That's another story. We were not in touch. So I went. And it didn't strike me until afterwards. You know. But that was late. By that time, a lot of these people were dead, you know, or barely, you know, walking and I was one of the younger ones because the kinder transport children could have been 5 years, 5 or 6 years younger than or maybe 5 years older, and that possibly 6, but then that would 5 or 6 somewhere. But then that was the cutoff date. So that, you know, that was the age group. Before and after that was nothing. So it took a long time before anybody would talk to anybody. A whole generation.
What is something that you'd like people to take away from listening to this testimony?
In 25 words or less. Well, I think, you know, most things that can be said about that have been said already. Um, and I already said the one thing that I think hasn't been said enough, which is that all the survivor stories are atypical stories. They're atypical because they survived. That's the atypical part. Whatever the details are, the atypical part is that they survived, and they are only a small sample of the totality that didn't survive. And I mean, yeah, you have people, you know, Elie Wiesel and people like that can, you know, wrote books. And by the way, is Primo Levi an author that you know? Okay, he's the I can't read Wiesel, but I just can't stand him. But Primo Levi is Primo, and he wrote a book titled Auschwitz. Well, no, it has some kind of fancy title, so you don't know what it's about. But it's about he was in Auschwitz, and he wrote about it. And I've really not read anything about Auschwitz that I could read, except him. Him I could read. And he's very remarkable. And then he committed, in the end, after lots of books, he committed suicide. Oh, that's not admitted. He either committed suicide or he had an accidental fall. He had an accidental fall from way up in a stairwell in a house where he had lived for ages. If you believe that, you believe anything.
Thank you, Herta. On that note, we'll end.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll tap your shoulder. So we'd love to know who's in these pictures and where and when it was taken.
Just this.
Yes.
For now.
For now.
It's
Ready?
the same as that.
Yes. So you
Beginning
can
here.
describe to me what you see
Okay.
here and who,
Okay.
when, and where. There we go.
So
Ready?
Yep.
Okay.
So beginning here on the upper left, all of these are on board the St. Louis ship. And on the upper left is obviously the captain's dinner for the passengers, because it's all decorated up. And at the table, at the extreme right is my mother. Then there are two people I don't know. And then there's my father. And then the other people I don't know. They're just passengers. On the next picture, with the rakish hat, is my father. So this is crossing the Atlantic on the St. Louis in April, May, not midwinter, but you can see they're well bundled up. And in the beret is my father, and under the covered with the robe is my mother. And there's a story about that blanket that I will tell you in a minute. In the next picture, the two standing, so going down to the left-hand side, the two people standing are my mother and father. And my mother's got a kerchief around her. And my father looks unaccustomed, windblown, and in a light colored jacket. He almost never dressed like that. And then lying in the deck chairs, very small, it's my mother and father. I can really hardly see that, but the man is my father. And all covered up is my mother. And then on the next deck chairs is a little bit larger. So the man is my father, and my mother is holding this thing, which you can't see very well, but it's a St. Louis life preserver, which she's holding for the purpose of the picture. And it says on it, whatever, SS St. Louis. It was an American ship, the St. Louis. No, I'm saying that wrong. It was Hamburg America line at that time. That was a German ship. So then on the very bottom, this is my mother sitting at a portable typewriter, and she's grinning. I mean, it's a post picture, but she's grinning, and that's my father stretched out in the chair reading. This one here, I really can't tell you. Can't really tell you anything about that. There might be my mother and father on there, but it's. And on the extreme right is, again, this is my mother with my father standing behind her. So I think we got that page. The thing about the blanket that's covering my mother is that was a black and yellow plush blanket. with a black wool lining, um, which arrived at our house in Vienna. My father, it was not something I grew up with. This is 1938, when he was arrested by the Nazis at Kristallnacht. Um, it was when it was November, it was winter, and he didn't. He had lost. He'd had a warm top coat and suit jacket on. They were gone, but somebody, some other Jew, I think, had given him this plush, this yellow and black plush blanket, and he arrived home wrapped in that around his shoulders, and with his, I don't know if I told that, but they had dislocated his shoulder, and so he had this arm dangling by his side, and that blanket wrapped around him, and that was really, that came into my life in this traumatic way. And they took that blanket with them on the St. Louis, and eventually it made it to San Francisco. And in those days, I never asked about it. These things could never be discussed, really. It was too upsetting for my family. He would never even let you consider discussing it. But I could not understand how they could stand to keep it in the house. But it was still there. It went on the St. Louis with them, and it still made it to San Francisco. And much later, somebody said to me, maybe it was a reminder of dangers survived. Maybe. I personally think it was because they never threw anything out if they could avoid it. And so this traveled with them. But at some point, they threw it out. When I got to looking at these pictures, and I wanted to look at it was, I didn't look at these pictures. I didn't say this for your recording, by the way, but I wouldn't have anything to do with the past for 40 or 50 years. And these pictures sat in a box in what is now in one of the back bedrooms in a cardboard box on the floor. I never even opened. They were my mother's. I never even opened it. I wouldn't even look at it. And then in 2000, well, I looked at it a little bit when I was asked to make some presentations to some school children. And at those times, I've always felt, with the children, you got to give them something they can have in their hands to look at. And so I dig around, I found the postcards I wrote from the train, and I made copies of, and never let them pass around, but I made copies of them so I could talk about them, and I had some pictures too. Before that, I never looked at all. And so I didn't look at these. And then in 2012, the director of the archives of the Jewish Museum of Berlin traveled to the West Coast. He did that 2 or 3 times, visiting Jewish communities, looking for survivors, who might have things to give to the Jewish Museum in Berlin. And on one of those visits, he came to the agency, to the Old Jewish Family and Children's Agency, East Bay, here right in Berkeley. And he went around the table, and where we were all sitting, we had a writing group and a reading group and so on. Oh, I have another thing, little cute thing to tell you. So he came around. He asked who had something that they might be willing to give to the museum, and people had a candelabra, and they had a Shabbos thing and a book thing. So he came to me. I said, I don't have any of those things. I have some I have some pictures from the St. Louis. Oh, he perked right up. He says, we have very little on the St. Louis. And so he came to so he wanted to come and see what I had. So he came and he got some pictures. I had a teddy bear. He really wanted that teddy bear. So there's a teddy bear from a Jewish child, immigrant child, a little teddy bear in the museum in Jerusalem. And he wanted to have one too. So I said, okay. So we had to find it. I had it in a closet somewhere, and we found it. So he got the teddy bear.
Okay, we're good.
So that is my green card from November 1939 from New York. We landed in New York on November 1st, much to my chagrin, because we missed the World's Fair.
Yeah.
Okay, this is my uncle, Joseph. The family called him Joji, which is really a Hungarian diminutive of Joseph. My mother's oldest brother. In World War I, he was a lieutenant in the Austrian army. This is a postcard. This is a postcard that I wrote. It was evidently handed out to us at the when we arrived, when the children's transport arrived in London, or maybe they had it aboard, but it was handed out to us, so that I wrote it, and it was sent from London. I think it was postmarked London. So we left Vienna one night, we traveled the whole next day, and then arrived in London the evening of the following day. And so somewhere along the road, somewhere on the train or on the ferry, the card was given to us, and I wrote it, and it was mailed for us. I don't know by whom. We were, we were shepherded. So if somebody gave us a card and said, write a postcard home, we wrote a postcard home, and then they collected it, and then somebody mailed it. But this was mailed in London.